Welcome to the Canon EOS R5 Complete Camera Guide. My name is John Gringo, and boy oh boy do I have a great class in store for you. I think we all know that we've got a great camera to work with, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you how everything works. We're going to go through all the buttons, the dials, all the menu tabs and features in there, and I'm going to give you some great examples and some recommendations on how to set your camera up and make it the best for your use. Now, before we dive into the class, I do want to mention that I'm a longtime Canon fan. I have been a longtime user of the 5D series. I used the original 5D for several years, traveling around the world. I was with the Mark II, the Mark III, and I still have the Mark IV right now. And I've taken them all to many foreign countries and done a lot of different shoots in them. And this is the heir apparent to the 5D throne, it looks like. And I couldn't be happier. It's a great camera for it. Let me show you what we're going to be doing in this class. Start off with a little introduction, get you used to this new class and what we're going to be doing in here. We're going to cover a few basics and a few important things in this little camera basics section. And then we dive into the really important sections. We're going to do a whole section on all the ways to control the exposure and tools that you can use. And then the focus section has a lot of new things to talk about in here, and it's got some great things to share with you there. The drive controls are very important. We'll talk about a few other things like intervalometer and multi-exposure in there. We'll then take a tour of the camera, looking at all the remaining buttons and dials to see what they do. We'll look at the options you have in the viewfinder and the LCD screen on the back of the camera. The quick menu is where you'll find a lot of your most useful features in a quick menu. We have one section where pretty much everything movie related is in. So for getting high quality movies, that's going to be important. Then we take a look around the camera for the inputs and output ports. We talk about the memory cards. And then we have a little section on lenses, give you some tips and recommendations when using the lenses. And then the next several sections of the class are on the menu. We're going to go through each tab and all the items in there with recommendations and advice on what all these features do. And finally, at the end, I will give you my field setup guide, which is where I'll give you recommendations for different types of settings, for different types of photography, which should serve as a good starting point for where you might want to go with your own photography. And so, very complete class. Also, part of the class is the PDF here. And what this is, it's not that big. It's just kind of designed to be a helpful tool to go along with the class. The main thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to take the menu system in the camera and lay it out so that it's nice and easy to see on as few pages as possible. So I've got it onto 2 pages. And so on here we have the full list of the menu items all in order with the recommendations that you'll find me giving you in the class. And as I say, this is a good starting point. And so I know you're all going to do your own things with the camera, which is great. And so I have 2 more pages of this without my recommendations. And that way you can put in your own settings, your own notes, and have a nice, clean, fresh one for yourself. And then at the back of this, if I can get to the back of it, I'm going to have the field set up with some additional notes. And so if you want to fold that up and cram it into the back pocket of your camera bag, you have some notes out in the field that you can easily take with you. So that comes with the purchase of the whole class. And so look for that download. All right, let's get into the class. First off, this class is about the R5 and not a lot of other things. And so I know you can hook this camera up to other flash units and you can do remote flash and groups and stuff. And that's great, but that's not what we're going to do. You can do tethering with this, but it involves another piece of device that not everyone is going to have the same piece. And so I'm concentrating on specifically what this camera does with a lens attached. Next, I kind of have my own style, and I am interested in how to do things manually and how to get the highest quality images possible. There's a number of cool features in this camera where it will combine images and do things for you and create kind of a finished piece of artwork. And that's nice, and we'll talk about it, and I'll show you some examples of that. But I want to know how to do it myself, and that's what I want to know. That's what I want to teach you how to do so that you can do it over and over again and you know what it takes to make that happen. Finally, I don't know how much you know. I know that I got a wide variety of people who watch these classes, And some people are professionals and they're looking for just small little tidbits of information that are going to help them in specific areas. And I have pulled together as many of those as I can find, and they are sprinkled throughout the entire class. I do also know that sometimes people get into photography. They have the means to buy a decent camera. They buy a nice camera like this, and they don't necessarily have all the training that other people that might have this camera have. And so I know that a lot of photographers are self-taught, which in my opinion also means there's often a lot of gaps and holes in the education. And so I tend to explain a little bit more. So for some of you more experienced photographers, there will be brief review moments where it's not the worst thing in the world to have a particular concept reiterated in a new way. So I'm going to be covering this class for a wide variety of users, from relatively low end, but I imagine most people are going to have a fair bit of experience if they're getting into this camera. All right, the instruction manual for the camera, well, that is something that I have gone through page by page, so hopefully you do not have to. It is still useful for detailed specifications, compatibility, and further info on certain concepts and ideas. For instance, when you're shooting videos, the camera has limitations as to how long it can shoot in certain modes before it needs to cool down, and then how long does it need to wait before you can shoot again, and then how long can you shoot again. And I'm not going to list all those items in this class. If you want to read what Canon says, you can dive into their instruction manual for that type of specification. This class is going to try to cover 99% of the operation of the camera for 99% of the users out there. And so I'm going to cover most all of it, but you might still need to dive in there for something or another. Okay, little moment on Canon history. I always like to know, who is this company? I know we know Canon. They've been around for a long time. They started making low-end cameras, actually. They were going after the low-end market when they first got started, and then they went for the high-end market back in '71 with their professional F1 camera. 1987 is a big year because that's when they went autofocus. And that EF lens mount that they had on that camera, well, those lenses will actually work on this camera very, very well with the correct adapter. They went digital in 2000 with the 3-megapixel D30. They brought out a mirrorless camera in 2012, but it's a cropped frame mirrorless, and then they went full frame mirrorless in 2018, and then they started putting all of their efforts, it looks like, into this new mirrorless market. And so they are really pushing hard at the time that I'm making this class with new cameras and new lenses. So the way the Canon system works right now is there are 4 different components to it. There are mirrorless cameras and DSLRs. This, of course, is a mirrorless camera. It is a full frame sensor. They do make mirrorless crop frame sensor cameras, and they are very different cameras. They do come from Canon. They have somewhat similar menu systems in their style and look, but the lenses and the lens mount is completely different. For a long time, Canon was focusing on the DSLR market, and their full frame cameras were aimed at the upper end, the professionals. They had a great series of cameras that still are out there right now. They're doing great. The crop frame DSLRs were incredibly popular for many, many years. A lot of great features, small size and so forth. And the lenses from those DSLRs can work on this mirrorless camera with the correct adapter. But once again, the 2 mirrorless systems use completely different lens mounts. And so this camera uses an RF lens mount. And so ideally, you'd want to have an RF lens. And right now, it's mostly limited to Canon, but there are some other manufacturers that are starting to make lenses for this. The EFM lenses do not mount on this camera in any way, shape, or form. I haven't seen an adapter that works. They don't work natively on there. And so if you're at a garage sale and you see a Canon mirrorless lens for sale real cheap, you want to check out which mount it is, because it may or may not fit on this camera. You want to make sure that you're looking at the RF lens mount. All right, let's just take a quick moment to talk about care and handling of this camera. It's not an underwater camera. It is weatherproof. The camera can be hooked up to a lot of different devices and different brands of lenses and memory cards and so forth. The one area I would really stick with Canon is with the power source, and so the batteries. And so there are aftermarket batteries out there. They don't tend to last as long, and it's a little bit more for the Canon batteries, but I definitely think it's worth it, so I'd stick with them. And I always like to pull one kind of strange thing out of the instruction manual, and in the warnings, Canon says that you're not supposed to drop this camera. Who knew? That's just very surprising information, and I'm really glad they put it down in writing because now all of us know about it, and all of us will never drop our camera because we were told explicitly that we were not supposed to drop it. As far as the construction of the camera, we have a magnesium alloy chassis, well-built camera, designed for some pretty rugged use, I believe. The specific weather sealing on it, well, they classify it, Canon classifies it as 5D class weather sealing, which means it's sealed the same as the 5D series of cameras, which I don't know, it doesn't meet any specific standard, but according to their standard, it's that standard. And that's generally going to mean that there are weather seals in and around pretty much all the ports and dials and buttons on the camera. If it was my camera, and this is my camera, I would not hesitate going out in the rain to get a shot. I wouldn't want to spend a long period of time out there without a rain cover. But if it's raining a little bit, yeah, you can pop out, get a shot, be out there for a little while, but you push it too hard, you're probably going to have a problem with the camera. One of the ways the camera life is measured in terms of longevity is with the shutter life. How long will the shutter last in the camera? And 500,000 cycles is the longest I have seen on any camera. Back in the film days, it was around 50,000, and a good professional camera was 150,000. Now with a lot of the more modern cameras, I'm seeing numbers like 200 and 300,000, but this is the first time I've seen 500,000. So very impressive. Looks like it's a camera that'll last you for a very long time. All right, let's make sure we've got our camera ready for our class today. You're going to need a charged battery because we're going to be taking some test shots and you're going to want to be playing with your camera. That's part of the class. You get to play with the camera while you take the class. You'll need a lens on there because you're going to take some practice photos, I'm sure. You don't need 2 memory cards, but you'll need one of the 2 memory cards in there. Turn the camera on, which is what I'm going to do right now. Over on the side of the camera, there is a focus switch, and we'll talk more about this in the focusing section, but for right now, just make sure that's in the autofocus position. Most all lenses that will fit this have an autofocus switch, so get that set. The mode dial on the back of the camera, we can press that and get it turned to the P setting right there, and so now we're set with that, and then I'm just going to press down on the shutter release and take a photo, make sure the camera's working. Hopefully yours is as well. If not, go get your camera charged up or get a memory card for it at this time. All right, as we go through this class, I'm going to be going through a lot of the outside controls first. And I'll be talking about a particular button, and I might say, hey, in the menu, you're allowed to customize this button to do this other particular feature. And then I'm going to show you this little menu reference box, and that'll let those of you who want to jump ahead, you can pause the video, follow this little clues as to where to go in the menu to make that change, if you want to jump ahead and make that change right away. Now, some of you might not be so sure that you want to make that change right away. Well, as we go through the class and we get into the menu setting, I'll remind you, hey, we talked about this feature back in this section, and if you want to know more information, go back and check that out back there. Because with this camera, we'll sometimes encounter information 2 or 3 times because there's a button for it, and then it's in the quick menu, and then it's in the full menu. And I'm not going to explain the full thing 3 times. I'll generally just explain it fully the first time and then remind you about it the second and third time. So once you've watched the class the first time, probably in a sequential order, which is how I kind of designed it, after you want to review and things, then it's great to pop around to wherever you need to go. All right, firmware. Firmware is the software that runs the camera, and it also controls the look and what's listed in the menu system. And so my camera, at the time of this recording, is on version 1.3.1. In fact, let's all check what our cameras are right now. And the way you do that is you go into the menu system, you dial over to setup number 6, and you see where the firmware is. So let's go ahead and do that on the camera here. So get the cameras turned onto the menu system, and the mode dial up here on the top right hand corner of the camera allows you to switch from tab to tab, and we're going to go over to the wrench, and then you can use the front dial to go back and forth, and we're going to go to setup menu number 6, and I can see down here it's at 1.3.1. I'll press set just to enter here. There's another one for the lens, which we'll talk about later. But the one for the camera is 1.31. Now, if you are less than that, then there is updated software at Canon's website. And so what you do to get that software is you go to Canon's website, look for their firmware, download the appropriate firmware for the camera and the type of computer you have, put that on a memory card, put the memory card in the camera, come here in the menu system, the camera will recognize that there is new firmware, and it will spend about 2 to 5 minutes uploading that new firmware and give you new software on your camera. Now, since the camera came out, they have updated it fairly significantly, which is the reason it's 1.3. And so if it was a really minor upgrade, it's like 1.01. And that's usually a little bug fix or maybe a spelling mistake in one of the foreign languages. And so they've added a new feature that we'll be talking about later in this class. Now, if you're watching this class in the future, and I know you are because this is not being broadcast live right now, Canon might have even newer firmware than I have in this camera. And so you may go to Canon's website and there might be version 1.5 or 2.1 or who knows what, and they might have added a new feature that I didn't even know about in this particular class. So just be aware of where you are versus where I am in this regard. All right, for those of you that have had your camera for a little while and you might have played around with a lot of the features and you're thinking you would like to start from a fresh slate, well, I want to start from a fresh slate. I've been playing with my camera extensively since I got it out of the box, and I want to make sure that those who want to follow along can all follow along together from the same spot. So what I'm going to do with my camera, and you can choose to do this or not, is I'm going to completely reset my camera back to the factory default settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the setup menu, and I'm going to reset the basic settings on this camera as well as a few of the other settings that I know that I've gone in and played around with. So let's go ahead and get the camera fired up and dive into the menu. We were just looking at the firmware and we don't have far to go. We want to go to setup menu number 5 and go to the reset camera. And so only do this if you want to reset all your settings on your camera. So I'm going to reset the basic settings to start with, which is a lot of your basic exposure information and basic settings throughout the camera, but there's a lot of other things that you can do as well. Now when I press menu, it goes back to the first tab on the menu, so I'm going to dial back over to the setup menu, come over to page 5, come into reset and look at some of the other settings. Root certificate, haven't been doing any work in that area. Communications, I have been playing with the Wi-Fi system. We're going to be redoing that a little bit later. Let's see, shooting info display. Let's go ahead and reset this one. I did play around with these a little bit, but I think I just played around with that one. Did not go into that yet. I'm just looking for things that I've already played with and clearing these things out. And make sure that these things are all cleared out. So this is about as close to the factory reset as you can get now. I haven't had to reset the date or the language, luckily, and so it's not that deep of a reset. So as you go through these other settings, you'll see that there are a number of other options in there that you can reset as necessary. Now, there is a clear all custom functions, and that is actually the same thing that's in the other settings here. So that's kind of a duplicate setting. The clear customized settings, though, is something that you also want to clear out, because if you have customized buttons in the camera, that if you've reprogrammed one of the buttons, that you have to go into custom functions, clear customized settings on that particular one to get it out. So there's a lot of things that get stuck in there. All right, folks, that is just the introduction. We have a lot more to go to. This is going to be a very large class. I hope you have patience, because we're going to be taking a long journey, and it's going to be an interesting journey, and this is just the beginning.